I was 11 at the time, living in a nice suburban neighborhood. My family had recently moved into a house my parents had built, and it was our first home after living in a rented house in a rough area. The new place was a huge upgrade, a peaceful, friendly neighborhood. It didn't take long for our whole family to make friends, especially with the neighbors 3 doors down. They had a daughter my age and a younger one, the same age as my sister. Our parents got along well, and we started hanging out a lot. Barbecues at their house, parties at ours, that sort of thing. The friendships formed quickly and felt solid, but after about a year, I began to notice things weren't quite what they seemed. I remember seeing police cars at their house a few times in the evenings. I'd ask my parents what was going on, but they always brushed it off with something like, "Oh, it's nothing, just checking in on them." I wasn't a genius, but at 11, that didn't quite add up. Why didn't the police ever come check on us? One day, I was over at their house hanging out. The daughter went across the street to get another friend, leaving me alone with the father. It wasn't unusual for us to be alone together. This had happened before. But this time, something felt different. I couldn't explain it at the time, but I started feeling uncomfortable, and the urge to leave grew stronger. A few minutes later, he told me he had something cool to show me. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was related to baseball cards, something I was really into. Excited, I followed him. He pulled down the ladder to the attic and asked me to come up. At first, I didn't hesitate, but as I started climbing, something changed. He was ahead of me on the ladder, and when he looked back to help me up, I saw something in his face, his smile, his eyes. It wasn't right. There was something about it that felt off, almost evil. I can still picture it clearly. I don't know exactly what it was, but something clicked inside me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I jumped off the ladder and ran out the door as fast as I could. I sprinted all the way home, barely holding back tears. When I burst through the front door, my mom was there, and she could immediately tell something was wrong. She calmed me down as I tried to make sense of what had happened. I was so scared, but my parents mostly brushed it off as just me being frightened for no reason. That same night, around 3 a.m., I was suddenly woken up. I opened my eyes to see my mom sitting on my bed, holding me like a baby. I could still smell her perfume and feel the tightness of her embrace. I remember her tears falling onto my cheek. As I woke up fully, I looked out the window and saw something that made my heart stop. Our neighbor's house was surrounded by police and fire trucks. It turned out that the father had killed his entire family in the attic after a standoff with the police. There's no doubt in my mind, or my mom's, that if I had gone up into that attic, I would have been one of his victims. To this day, I still get chills thinking about it. My husband, Andy, and I have been married for 3 years. We have a 16-month-old son and 4 dogs. After our son was born, our old house started to feel cramped, so we decided it was time to move. We found a new place, almost double the size of our previous home, and close to the same price. It was on the outskirts of town, a bit farther from everything, but we both agreed it was worth it. Moving is never fun, but doing it with a toddler is another level of exhausting. So when Andy told me he'd invited his brother's family to stay with us, less than a week after we moved in, I was beyond annoyed. The timing was terrible, and as a stay-at-home mom, most of the unpacking naturally fell to me. The house is a 2-story, with 3 bedrooms upstairs. Downstairs, we have a living room, kitchen, dining room, a playroom, and Andy's media room. Since Andy's brother, his wife, and their 3 daughters would be staying with us, I figured the guest room wouldn't be enough space. We set up the nursery for the girls, moved our son into our bedroom, and suddenly, every single room had to be fully unpacked. No stashing boxes in a spare room. I've always had a hard time sleeping in new places, and this house, built around 40 years ago, creaks constantly. At night, I kept thinking I heard footsteps above me, but I wrote it off. The only thing up there was the attic. I assumed it was just the old wood settling, or maybe, worst case scenario, a mouse. I mentioned it to Andy, and he said we'd call an exterminator on payday. With everything else going on, I pushed it out of my mind. 3 days into unpacking, Andy started complaining about missing things. His razor, sunglasses, flip-flops, little stuff. I was still working on unpacking the downstairs, so I figured he mislabeled a box or left something behind. Honestly, I didn't think much of it. I was too focused on getting everything ready before our guests arrived in 3 days. Once the downstairs was done, I moved upstairs. I started with the guest room and nursery. They needed to be ready and childproofed. Our bedroom was last. I kept finding open boxes and assumed Andy had been rummaging through them. I should have asked, but I was overwhelmed. Then I noticed some of my things were missing too. Items I knew I had packed. My favorite bra, some scrapbooks, a few lipsticks. I told Andy, and he said the same thing I'd told him. It'll turn up. It's probably in another box. By the time our guests arrived, I still had 3 boxes left to unpack. I shoved them into the closet, planning to deal with them later. Having 8 people and 4 dogs in one house was a lot, and with 4 kids under the age of 5, it was chaos. One morning, my sister-in-law asked me if I'd seen a pink blanket one of the girls had lost. I hadn't, but she blamed it on my dogs, or my son. I love my nieces, but I was relieved when they left a week later. Life started to settle down. We completely forgot about the missing items and the exterminator. That is, until my mom visited. While we were talking, she paused and asked, "Do you hear that? Something's moving around up there." She had the same thought I did, a mouse or a squirrel. That was enough to finally push me into action. I called the exterminator that day and scheduled an appointment for the next. Andy took the day off to be home for it. The exterminator, his name was Dave, arrived while I was making lunch for our son. Andy took him up to the attic. Neither of us had been up there yet, so it seemed like a good time. They were back downstairs within minutes, running. Andy looked me dead in the eye and told me to stop what I was doing. Take Camden outside with Dave now, while he put the dogs in the backyard. I didn't know what was going on, but something in his voice made me move without question. Dave walked me out to his truck and told me to sit inside with the AC running. When Andy joined us, I saw a look in his eyes I'll never forget, pure terror. He made a phone call, and when he was done, both he and Dave climbed into the truck. Dave locked the doors. Andy didn't tell me what they'd found until the police arrived. In the attic was an air mattress, neatly laid out with blankets. It looked like someone had been sleeping there recently. Scattered around were many of the things we thought we'd lost. Andy's razor, my scrapbooks, my bra. The photos from the scrapbooks had been torn out and taped to the attic walls. Some of the faces were marked with red X's, drawn on with my missing lipstick. Andy's razor was there, but the blades had been removed. My son's stuffed animal was up there too, stabbed repeatedly with a kitchen knife, which was still lodged in its head. My bra was also there, and there's no delicate way to put this. Someone had masturbated on it. Everything after that was a blur. The police took statements, collected evidence. An officer took pictures not just of the attic, but of every spot in the house where the stolen items had last been seen. We stayed in a hotel that night, and for now, we don't know when we'll go back. Honestly, I don't want to, but breaking the lease would cost more than we can afford. Andy has already called to get a security system installed, and the locks changed. Tomorrow, he's planning to follow up with a detective. We're hoping they can get DNA off the evidence, maybe from the bra. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again until they catch whoever it was. I live in a 2-story house with my husband. The house is fairly old, but it has a decent-sized attic up top. We don't really use the attic for much, aside from storage, which actually helps keep the rest of the house nice and organized. Last fall, I needed to grab some documents and headed up there. I hadn't been in the attic for quite some time. I pulled down the latch in the ceiling, and the staircase folded down from the attic door all the way to the floor. I climbed up, and as soon as I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. Some of the items looked like they'd been rearranged. We've got a lot of boxes and random junk up there, so the space is pretty packed, but I could tell it wasn't the way I had left it. It gave me a weird feeling. Still, I figured my husband had probably been up there and moved some things around for whatever reason. That seemed like the most logical explanation. As I searched through a few boxes, I started to feel really uneasy. The attic's actually bigger than it looks from the outside, and I had to go all the way to the far end to find what I was looking for. I quickly grabbed the documents and headed back downstairs. Right away, I asked my husband if he'd been in the attic recently. He casually said he had, maybe a couple of weeks ago. That made me feel a lot better. I hadn't been up there in months, so it made sense. The next day, I went back up to the attic to return the documents. I made my way to the same corner where I had found them, and just as I was putting them away, I heard my husband shouting my name. His voice sounded panicked. I called back, asking what he needed, but he just kept yelling for me, louder and more urgently. I walked about 10 feet over, toward where I could see the attic entrance, and I saw the door swinging open. My husband was there, frantically motioning for me to come down. I ran over, completely confused, and we both rushed downstairs. Once we were safely out, he called the police. I was in shock. I didn't understand what was happening until he told me what he saw. After I had gone up to the attic, he had walked into the hallway to use the bathroom. That's when he saw a man's arm reach down from the attic entrance and pull the staircase up, closing the door behind it. That's when he started yelling for me. He knew someone else was up there with me. We left the house and waited for the police to arrive. When they searched the attic, they found a man hiding in the far corner, behind a stack of boxes. They said it looked like he had been living there for a few days. It still gives me chills to think about it. That both times I had been in the attic, I wasn't alone, and it wasn't my husband who had moved things around after all. I'm just incredibly grateful he noticed what was happening when he did, because I don't know what would have happened to me otherwise. It was an ordinary evening, just like any other. I was in my room watching TV while my mom was downstairs making dinner. My door was shut, as it usually was. I liked my privacy. My room was a bit unusual. It connected directly to the attic. Technically, it wasn't even meant to be a bedroom. But with 4 kids in the house, space was limited, so it became mine. Because of that attic connection, I often heard little cracks in the ceiling. I was used to it. The attic was full of heavy boxes, and they constantly put pressure on the ceiling above me. But that night, there was one crack that was different. It was loud, so loud it actually made me jump. For a second, I considered pulling the attic door down to check. but I decided against it. I told myself it was just pressure from the boxes. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. Truth is, I was terrified of that attic. I had been my whole life. I hated that it was connected to my room. Over dinner, I told my mom about the loud noise and admitted how uneasy it made me feel. She brushed it off, told me it was just boxes, junk, maybe some mice. She even smiled when she said the mice part, trying to lighten the mood. Later that night, I went back to my room. I watched TV and played video games, even after everyone else had gone to bed. I kept the volume low. Our house had paper-thin walls, and I didn't want to wake anyone up. Then I heard it again, another crack in the ceiling. Not as loud as before, but loud enough to make me pause my game and listen. Silence. My heart was racing. I grabbed the stepladder and pulled down the attic door. There was no light up there. You had to use a flashlight to see anything. I didn't go in, though. I just peeked my head up into the opening. All I could see were piles, and piles of old boxes. It looked just like my mom said it would. Still, I figured I'd ask her to check it out with me the next day. Feeling a little more at ease, I went back to my game. About an hour later, I shut it off and decided to get some sleep. That's when I heard something new. Not the usual creaks or cracks. These were thumps, steady, moving. It sounded like footsteps. The sound stopped right above the attic door. Then, silence. I stared at that door, not blinking, barely breathing, just waiting. And then, slowly, it began to lift. Even though I had been expecting something, I wasn't prepared for that. I watched in disbelief as the door cracked open, and in that moment, it didn't feel real. I climbed out of bed as quietly as I could and tiptoed to my mom's room. When I told her what happened, she told me to stay there and went to get my brothers. A minute later, I heard yelling, my brothers shouting from my room, my mom screaming for them to come back. Whoever had been in the attic was gone. Both of my older brothers went up there, but they didn't find anyone. My mom admitted she had heard the noises too, but hadn't thought much of it until I came to her about the attic door. After that night, the sounds stopped. Nothing more than the occasional crack here and there. But I never looked at that attic the same way again. In December of 2020, I applied for a new apartment after deciding to move out of my old one. The unit I originally applied for ended up getting leased to someone else before I could bring in my deposit. So, the management company offered me the last available unit they had. It was the same layout, same price, same owner. Everything was identical except for the apartment number. I hadn't applied for this particular unit, so I didn't get to see it before signing the lease. I had only seen the one I originally wanted. When I finally walked into the new place, it was a disaster. The tub was rusted. The toilet was broken in a way that left it open and constantly releasing a foul odor into the air. The dryer connection was clogged, so clothes wouldn't dry. And there was something, some kind of plant or tree root, growing through the floor by the hallway door, causing a visible hump in the floorboards. I filed daily complaints with the management company and was even in the process of hiring an attorney. After nearly a month of back and forth, in January 2021, they finally offered to move me into a different unit. I agreed. This new unit was in much better condition and actually livable. I hired movers, redirected deliveries, and my 18-year-old daughter and I started moving in the few belongings we had from our previous place. We spent our first night in the new apartment, and the next morning, something strange happened. As we were getting ready to head out, my daughter stepped outside to grab something from the car. A few minutes later, I heard a rattling noise. At first, I thought it was her outside, maybe knocking on a window or trying to get my attention. I started walking toward the front door until I realized the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from above my head. I stopped just outside my bedroom doorway and looked up. The attic entry door was directly above me, and it was wide open, so wide I could see straight up into the trusses of the roof, but I couldn't see who or what was up there. Panicked, I shouted, "I don't know who you are, but I'm about to blow your brains out." I ran to my dresser, grabbed my gun, and the moment I did, the attic door slammed shut. The noises quickly moved away, toward the other side of the duplex, my neighbor's side. My daughter came back inside to find me pacing with the gun still in my hand. One look at me, and she knew something was seriously wrong. I told her what happened, and she immediately urged me to call the police. So I did. The sheriff arrived not long after. They used a mirror to check the attic, but didn't find anyone up there. Then they told me something that sent a chill down my spine. They had received a similar call before. Same description, same attic access, but from a different unit. I knew instantly they were talking about the first unit I had just moved out of. That unit had latches on the attic door, something I noticed before leaving. The sheriff went over to question the neighbor, but he claimed he wasn't even home. I found that strange. It had only been minutes since it all happened. I didn't see who it was, but deep down, I believe it was him. I never moved out, even though I had every right to break the lease after that. But I had already spent over $2,800 on the move, and I was just too exhausted to start over again. Instead, I had the same type of attic door latches installed that I saw in my old unit. I also contacted a security company to install a full alarm system. Now, there's a motion detector and a sensor on the attic door. So, if anyone ever tries to open it again, I'll know immediately. I've never really been a religious person. The few times I ever went to church were with my grandma, and honestly, those moments were more about bonding with her than anything spiritual. She loves when I show interest in her hobbies and beliefs. But that night, I was praying to anything that would listen. As a teenage girl, there are a few things you really start to appreciate. Having your own car and getting the house to yourself on the weekends. That Friday night in November, it was one of those rare, perfect evenings. The lights were off, I had popcorn, ice cream, a scary movie playing. It was my definition of relaxation. My parents were out for the night, and it was just me and my 2 cats curled up on the couch. Sometime into the movie, I started hearing what sounded like rain, or maybe snow, hitting the roof. I didn't think much of it. In fact, I've always found the sound of rain kind of soothing. I leaned back and kept watching. But then, I noticed something strange. A smell. It was faint at first, but unpleasant. Sharp. Chemical. I got up and sprayed some air freshener around. But it didn't help. I felt lightheaded. I even checked the oven and the fireplace to make sure the gas pilots weren't on. But everything looked normal. I took some aspirin and drank some water, trying to shake off the weird dizziness and headache. Not long after that, I heard it, thumping. It was coming from the back bedrooms. I sat up fast, heart pounding, head still foggy. I paused the movie and listened. My 2 cats, who had been peacefully lying on me, were now alert too, both staring down the hallway. The layout of our house is pretty open. From the couch, I could see the hallway that leads to the bedrooms and bathrooms. It starts right by the basement stairs. I could also see the front door, the giant sliding glass doors to the back porch, the kitchen, and the door to the garage. I suddenly felt very exposed. The thumping noise had me so paranoid. I grabbed my phone, car keys, and slipped my shoes on. I started turning on every light in the house. I figured I was just being overly jumpy from the horror movie. Until I got to my parents' bedroom. That's when things got off. Their room has an attic access panel in the ceiling. There's no ladder up to it. My dad never installed one. Thankfully, in retrospect. The first thing I checked was their closet. The closet door locks from the inside if it shuts. So I grabbed the little key from the door frame before going in. I looked up at the attic panel and froze. The plaster cover that sealed the opening had been pushed aside. It was hanging halfway off, and pieces of it were scattered across the closet floor. Someone had moved it and broken it. I stood there, staring up at the crawl space, not moving for a solid 30 seconds. Then I slowly backed out of the closet, shut the door tightly, and walked quickly, quietly, back toward the kitchen. Now, with the movie still paused and the house dead silent, I could clearly hear it, loud thumping in the attic, above the living room. It was moving toward the garage. That's where the second attic access was. I tiptoed to the garage door and locked both the handle and the deadbolt from the inside. My head was spinning. I felt like I was going to throw up. Something in me decided I shouldn't call anyone from inside the house, just in case they could hear me. So I prayed, quietly, in my head, praying that whoever was up there wouldn't come down before I could get out. I took a few shaky seconds to collect myself, and then I thought I heard the basement stairs creaking. That was it. I grabbed both cats, who, by some miracle, stayed calm, and stumbled toward the front door, throwing on a coat as I practically tripped into the freezing cold. The second I got outside, my headache lifted, like I'd stepped out of a fog. I sucked in the icy air, my lungs burning, and threw the cats into the car. It was 3 degrees that night, but luckily it wasn't raining or snowing like I'd thought. I made sure the heat was on for the cats and drove just a little ways down the street to a neighbor's house. My mom met me there. We sat across the street and watched as police searched the house top to bottom. About 15 minutes later, they came back out and said they didn't find anyone inside. But the door leading to the backyard from the garage was wide open, and the attic panel in the garage also open. Then came the part that still makes my skin crawl. They found footprints and handprints all over the attic floor, like someone had been crawling around up there on all fours, and the entire attic had been soaked in gasoline. Turns out, the sound I'd thought was rain, that was someone pouring gasoline, possibly from a watering can, onto the attic floor. The police said whoever it was had nearly passed out trying to light the house on fire. They hadn't accounted for the lack of ventilation and had been overcome by the fumes. They likely stumbled, maybe even fell from the attic opening in the garage. There was a little blood on the garage floor and on the back door handle. Weirdly, that part gave me a bit of relief. At least they didn't get away totally clean. Instant karma. As we stood there, talking to the officers about the cleanup and what would happen next, one of them asked if I'd been down to the basement that night. I said no. He told me the door under the stairs was wide open, and there was a gasoline can down there, too. But no one was inside. He didn't say it outright, but it was clear. There hadn't just been one person in the house that night. There were two, one in the attic, one in the basement. I had walked past the basement door twice. I never even looked back. After that, we stayed with my grandma for a while the gasoline was cleaned up and new locks were installed on both attic panels. But honestly, things were never really the same after that night. I don't like being home alone anymore, especially not at night. And even now, after all this time, I still won't go near the attic. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. But be careful, because sometimes the things we fear in stories have a way of finding us.